Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today we have Lance Christensen, Senior Policy Advisor for California Senator John Moorlach, and a former Reason pension analyst, and Lawrence McQuillan, who is Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Entrepreneurial Innovation at the Independent Institute in Oakland, and the author, on a book tour now, of California Dreaming, Lessons on How to Resolve America's Public Pension Crisis. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let's talk about you. Well, part of what you're doing at the Independent Institute is working on water issues. Is that correct?
Yep.
Is California's water problem one of scarcity or one of misallocation?
It's actually one of mispricing. Water in California, the price of water doesn't reflect its true scarcity. Therefore, it's misused. It's wasted. It's diverted to uses, especially in agriculture, that it wouldn't be used for if we priced it at its true scarcity value. For example, we grow a lot of alfalfa and rice in California. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to grow very water-intensive, low-value crops using very precious California water. And we also ship a lot of these, especially rice, out of the country. So we're effectively exporting water from California overseas by producing these low-value, high-intensity, water-intensity crops. So it encourages waste of any good when you don't price it to reflect its true value, and that's what's happening with California water.
Are you saying that the politicians and ultimately the voters of California don't know how to set the proper price on H2O?
Right. I mean, it should be traded just like every other good. Because
that's
the only way.
It is traded, but the politicians set the price.
It's exactly, and it's not traded on an open market, and that's the only way to really determine its true value and its true scarcity is by.
So we have wage and price control, or price controls on water. In effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a huge federal Central Valley Water Project. We have a huge state water project, and the government effectively influences and sets the price, and as a result, I mean, it's subsidized and it's misallocated as a result of it being mispriced.
Is there any place in the world where water is being priced on a market basis and being done so effectively?
Yes, especially parts of Australia have it. They get it right. In the 1990s and early 2000s, they experienced a mega drought there in Australia, and they instituted various market reforms. One was to essentially quantify water rights, so everybody kind of knew what rights they had to, what amount of water they had a right to, and then they allowed for exchanging of those water rights and actual water between buyers and sellers. And what emerged was a very efficient online trading platform called WaterFind, where in real time buyers and sellers could get together and trade rights to water and trade water regionally. And as a result, I mean, the price reflected its true scarcity of water. Water was allocated to its highest use. It wasn't wasted, it wasn't mispriced, and it's worked very well. I mean, it's something that we should adopt, especially in the western states in California.
How did they come up with the original allocation? In other words, how did they come up with how they distributed it?
Well, I think it was a lot like in California, where it was historical rights. In California we have senior rights, junior rights, based upon when you essentially made that claim to the amount of water that you use. So, I mean, California goes back before 1850, being before California was a state. So it was like a historically based right to a certain quantity of water.
So it wasn't just arbitrary.
It wasn't arbitrary, and then they could exchange it once these rights were, established and quantified. Yeah, and everybody could kind of see what everybody owns. I mean, that's another one of the big problems we have in California is that nobody really knows how much even senior right holders are using or have a right to. It's very well hidden oftentimes because people don't want to reveal exactly how much water they're using. So I think even like if you sell your home in California, I mean, at least you have to stake out the boundaries of the land that you're selling, and then you can exchange it. Well, I think water should work the same way. You should at least have to reveal how much you've been using, what is your historical quantity right that you have to, and then allow the markets to exchange these rights.
This would apply to both surface water and groundwater?
Correct. Absolutely, especially groundwater, because we're just seeing a huge depletion of
Well, yeah, that's interesting
groundwater
because
basins.
because there's you probably are familiar with this. Under the dome, there's talk of legislation to essentially allocate well water and make people put meters on their own wells.
Well, that's already law now, but yeah.
Okay, and that being the case, people who have a well and think that they have unlimited right to pump from their own well are getting their backs up.
Well, and some of them have a legitimate issue. If you've got a well and you've been able to use that for some time without any problems, then it can be more of a cost to drill deeper or to use other water, especially if you've established a certain crop or whatever you're doing. So that's one part of it. The other part is the state actually is not allowing for innovation in a lot of places, to be frank. Most of the water that we have challenges with, not most of it, but a lot of it, has to do with environmental impact sort of issues. Trying to save fish, perhaps, is one part of these things, which we could do in different ways. Like Australia actually took, and part of those water rights were sold to, or given to environmentalists for them to decide how to use those rights and not, and
that's done in
highest value.
Montana, Oregon, Idaho are using that. Yeah.
So in other words, you say, okay, we'll allocate X amount of water, not all of it, but a certain amount of water for the Delta smelt or for the salmon or whatever. And
if you want more of it, you have to go in the market like everybody else and purchase it.
Go buy more, and go back to your stakeholders and pay for it.
Well, and we also live right next to the ocean, and in places like Orange County where they have taken water, recycled water, and have pumped it back into the ground. They're able to use a lot more water down there in a very densely populated urban area because they're using it smartly. They're being innovative. Now, that requires energy and some other costs and resources, which can be expensive. But if you plan it out well enough and you think that it's a high priority, you can do things like that. That would be very productive.
And I think the point is, though, if you freed up the market and if you priced water at its true value in California, you'd have a lot of entrepreneurs rushing in with various ideas. And we're kind of pretending to be water entrepreneurs here, but you'd have true entrepreneurs, true scientists come in with all of these new original ideas in terms of not only how to use water that we have in the state today better, but also innovative ways to desal, for example, at a lower cost. I mean,
it's interesting. I mean, the difficulty to me seems like it would be figuring out how to allocate water rights in the first place, or how to define them. Because I look at the down by Santa Maria, San Luis Obispo area. There's a wine growing area where the climate is right for growing grapes, but you got to irrigate to grow grapes, particularly in that arid environment. And so they're drilling wells deeper and deeper and deeper to get enough water for the irrigation projects for new vineyards. Meanwhile, people with shallow wells for their house are running out of water. The wells go dry. And on top of that, you've got companies like Nestle coming in and going really deep to mine spring water to put in bottles and sell in New York or wherever, which to me, how do you sort out all of the various, essentially, property right and water issues with all of those various competing things who all say, well, I have this right going back to 1906 or 1806?
It's possible. I mean, you use adjudication.
Okay.
In other parts
so
of
you're
the
talking
world,
about judicial process.
Well, in other parts of the world, they've appointed water masters for various areas, and then the water master, that's his role, is to adjudicate the use of groundwater, for example. So he would decide, and there's various high-tech ways of doing this. Who's got a straw into that well, who's tapping from it, how much are they taking, how long does it take for the water to replenish the well. So what's coming out, what's going in. There's scientific ways of doing this.
So we don't have to fight Chinatown all over again?
No, we don't. And that would be a way then of rationally deciding, who has an actual legitimate right to this well underground reservoir, for example.
Let's assume
how much they're taking out and how much should they take out to sustain this long term. Because you got 4 straws and everybody's taking what they want, you might not be sustainable long term. So you do want to set up a sustainable, rational approach.
You have to avoid the tragedy.
But this can be done, and this has been done. It's expensive, but this is better than the system. It would be better than the system we have now, where it's a free-for-all. I mean,
Well, it's a tragedy of the commons.
right, and everybody's taking from their neighbor.
Now, assuming that you can, come up to an amicable solution to who owns what water, and it's sane and logical and makes sense from both a political and an economic standpoint, who loses and who wins? I mean, is the Central Valley going to continue to grow almonds and tomatoes and rice and corn?
I think they'll grow
or not.
I think they will grow almonds because it makes sense to grow almonds. That's a high value crops. I mean, if you're going to use scarce water, you want to divert it to the crops where you're going to get the highest return. You're not going to grow rice and alfalfa, but you will grow almonds. I mean, I think what will happen is that the price in the Central Valley of water is going to go up. Farmers will respond by implementing various water saving techniques. There's various ways of doing it. I mean, drip irrigation is the best. But they'll decide for themselves, given the price, what's the best way for me to solve this problem? How much water do I save? How much water do I continue to use? What crops do I grow with that water? I think it will be higher valued crops. And I think actually you'll see more water go to the city. So the price of water will actually fall in the higher population areas because less of it will be used in the Central Valley.
Will you also eventually get...
But I think the revenue from farming will continue to go up. The output will continue to go up. We'll actually grow more higher valued crops, but we'll use less water doing it. That's my prediction.
and I have rose-colored glasses to go along with it. What about the environmental arguments that you have to essentially flush all of the, the hard environmentalists will argue that there should never have ever been dams built in California, that we should have free-flowing rivers to the ocean, we should not be collecting surface water, we should be, have natural salmon runs wherever they existed 200 years ago, etc. These are people who have an ideological position that has not a whole lot to do with modern economics. How are you going to get a buy-in from the environmental community?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you ever will get a full buy-in, but I think what you could do is convert the system into where they would have to reveal how much it's worth to them for these environmental purposes.
How much is a delta snot worth?
Right now, if you can get a federal bill passed and judges that will enforce water into areas that you deem are environmentally sensitive and you want to protect, well, you never have to reveal what that's worth to you. The Sierra Club and Nature Conservancy and groups like that, their donors, give them money to fight lawsuits to take water, not to buy water. And I think, as Lance was mentioning earlier, we could have a system where they have to reveal how much this is worth, how much do they want to actually purchase to rewater streams, rewater rivers, to correct the delta, that sort of thing. It works in other states. So the problem with California, we've so manipulated the natural flows, unlike other states where they do have more water rewatering projects and, stream rewatering, and where they go and purchase water. It does tend to be in states where they've preserved kind of the natural flows, whereas we have done so much artificial manipulation of water in California. I don't think you can go back to where it was naturally. I just don't think that's a possibility. But I think you can still create a system that incentivizes people to reveal how much water for environmental purposes it's worth to them.
We also import a lot of water from other states, from the Colorado River in particular, which is a trickle by the time it gets to Baja.
Right.
Is this something that can be done at the state level, or does it require federal intervention?
Well,
federal law change?
There's going to be there has to be some federal intervention if we have these larger federal water projects in especially California. In the end, I think it just best serves everybody if California has some sort of autonomy over the water that we've got, rather than trying to fight a battle back in Washington, D.C., where over in the East Coast, they really don't have a lot of water issues as we do. They're different. The other one is, ironically enough, we could actually improve the environment. Wealth is health sort of thing. If you think about a drought like this that 100 years ago or 200 years ago, I'm pretty sure all the fish we're trying to save now would have died by now. So we're actually preserving species that we couldn't do before. And
Oh,
we can do it.
because we're able to release water from
Of course,
from
and we
the
could do it more
reservoirs.
effectively if we're a little more innovative in the strategies that we have, unleashing scientists and technicians and people who really understand how these systems work best.
Chile
Yeah.
is another country that's done some interesting things as far as markets in water. Are you familiar with them?
No, I'm not as familiar with Chile as Australia, but I mean, I have heard they've implemented some market-based approaches.
And the reason I mention that is because they've got a topography that's remarkably similar to California.
Right.
They've got-
Well, Australia does too. Israel does. These are all semi-arid, Mediterranean type climates where you never really know year from year what your water is going to be like, and you get it pretty much all at once, and then it's got to last for the rest of the year. But again, I mean, Israel's gone the route of desalinization, big time, and recycling.
Yeah, and that, makes a
using
lot,
what-
that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense to me, but there's also environmental pushback on desalinization. They're worried that it will raise the temperature of the water, or raise the salinity of the water that is fed back into the ocean wherever they're pulling it out.
Yeah, there's high tech ways though, solutions to that. There's to bury pipes in the sand where you disperse the water through small holes in the pipe. Turns out that the pipe doesn't get clogged that much and actually works very well in terms of dispersing the salt without concentrating it in one small area, which creates these dead zones, I think is what you're kind of talking about. But there's scientific, innovative entrepreneurial solutions to that as well by doing more misting or dispersion, which takes place underwater, sometimes under the surface of the ocean. And it turns out that these pipes don't get clogged. You think they would, but they actually work very well for decades. So there's lots of solutions. There's a company, Water FX in San Francisco, and they're devising lower cost means of desal, and they claim they've reduced the cost by 1/2.
I used to be a
cost.
skeptic on solar energy because I thought, I kept hearing that solar energy is, way too expensive compared to fossil fuel energy. But I understand that it's now getting almost competitive with some of the more expensive forms of fossil fuel. Is desalinization following that same model? Is it getting to a point where if we price surface water and well water correctly, would desal water be competitive economically?
In some regions of the state, it would.
If you have a need and you have a certain amount of people you've got to provide water for, there are ways that you can do this very effectively. Down south towards San Diego, they're doing some big projects of desal as well. It can be economical, and when you're competing with great shortages of water right now, which is also a storage issue. If we continue to keep up with the storage we had in the state of California since 1978, I believe was the last time we built a major dam. That's almost 40 years ago. That we wouldn't be talking about this as much. But again, short-term thinking provides long-term problems.
Yeah, I think the key is to price the water at its true value, which would then invite entrepreneurs in, assuming you're not going to prevent them from entering the market, and allow them to use their imagination, creativity to come up with various solutions, because the solutions probably won't be the same in different parts of the state. Down south probably makes more sense to do desal, and in other parts, especially Northern California, I mean, there's blueprints to create reservoirs up there that were never built. So again, and there's some prime locations for it. So again, it kind of depends on the part of the state you're talking about. But a decentralized approach, I think, would be the best because you'd find the right fit for the problem that they're facing.
California has a big water issue. That's obvious. We're all experiencing a drought. An issue which is not quite so obvious is the fact that we have a pension shortfall problem with public employee pensions, not to mention private pensions, but primarily public employee pensions. What's the root cause of California's pension shortfalls? You wrote about that. You've done some work on it.
Promising more than we can deliver, and frankly not putting enough resources into a long-term issue. Whenever we talk about pensions, we're talking about obligations that would go out not just 20 or 30 years, but 30, 40, 50, 70 years, depending on how long somebody lives and if they have a surviving spouse or whatever. We've made commitments to people, which, if that's part of the compensation package, fine. I don't begrudge anybody their pension or retirement funds. But yet we have to be realistic about how much it's going to cost going forward and then put the money in appropriately.
I mean, keep in mind that California's state employee pension system dates back to 1932. And at that time, they were very modest. They were very restricted in terms of what they could invest in. So they were fairly well managed. But over time, politics kicked in. Benefits became more generous. They overpromised what they could pay. They undercontributed because that allowed them to freed up that money to use for other government programs rather than putting it into the pension fund where the cost is 30, 40 years out. And legislators are going to be long gone out of office by the time that bill comes due. So it was an easy political game to play. Promise a lot up front, put in very little, use that money that you were supposed to put in for pensions on other spending programs, and knowing that you were going to be out of town when this bill came due. And now, unfortunately, the bill is here. It's upwards of $750 billion all in at the state and local level for unfunded public pension liabilities, measured correctly, I think. So now, we're struggling to figure out where we're going to come up with this money.
You figured out a way, right? You figured out a way to solve the pension problem.
Well, one way to do it, I think, would be to transition towards what the public sector or what the private sector did decades ago, which is 401ks, which is a much more transparent approach, more fiscally reasonable.
Doesn't that just transfer the risk from the employer to the employee?
Not necessarily. It depends on how they invest their money.
Well, yeah, but the risk then becomes on the employee rather than on whoever's managing the fund.
Well, now it's risky, though, too. I think it's
yes.
Yeah, because now we're faced this massive unfunded liability, and average people are going to get taxed to pay off.
So what it really does is it moves the risk from somebody who's managing it for you to yourself.
Right, but you also have then more control over how that money is invested.
Yeah, because you have control.
But getting back to what he was saying earlier, it doesn't have to be that way. There are ways you can structure these programs. TIA-CREF, for example, which is actually a defined benefit system, or defined contribution system, is the same sort of model, but in a way where you have more control and the risk is not on the taxpayer or on your employer. If you look in the federal law right now, a lot of private systems that have been going for years, they have the ability to cut their pensions if their money runs short. The private sector, or the public sector, doesn't. In California, they have a thing called the California rule. You promise it. The minute you promise that, it's on for the rest of your life, and you're obligated for that. There's no way to scale back, which is a challenge. And even for future employees, that's been one of the challenges we've worked at. How do you say to a whole group of new people coming in, well, you're not going to get as much as everybody else did? It's a hard problem to deal with.
Okay, you've come up with the solutions, though. What's the ABC?
Well, I think the most important thing is to switch over to a 401k plan.
Okay.
I would do it for all government employees in the state of California, both future and current, which they've done in other states. And then and you'd save a massive amount of money annually. I figured about $6 billion a year at the state level that the state of California would save if it transitioned to a 401k. And then you could use that savings to pay down the debt that's already been accumulated, make good on the promises that have already been made, so you don't have to go the route of Detroit and cut checks, reduce checks for current retirees. I don't think we want to see that done. So that's one approach. The other approach would be to do it on a go-forward basis for just new hires. That's kind of the approach I think that's been taken up in more states and is being considered seriously for a ballot initiative here in California in 2016.
What's the political probability that the problem will be tackled before the problem tackles us?
I think a lot of people realize that this is a legitimate problem. Earlier this year, Reason Foundation Again, disclosure, that's where it worked. We put out a survey. 72% of people recognized it as a problem and thought something should be done. And one of the solutions, or alternatives at least, was something along the line of a defined contribution system like a 401k or something similar. PPIC, a left-of-center organization here in California, just last week had a poll that had the exact same results. 72% of the people believe this is a problem, needs to be dealt with. How that happens in the legislature is a different story, but I think the people, when they recognize there's a problem, if it's on the ballot, there's a very good chance that this could change.
Yeah, fortunately, we can go around the legislature in California and go directly
do you
to
think
the
that'll
people
happen?
with ballot initiative.
It'll turn into a ballot initiative?
Yeah, I think it will, and I think also this is a case where the public is way ahead of politicians in terms of understanding the extent of the problem. They've seen this play out in Stockton and Vallejo and San Bernardino, where San Jose and other places where services are being cut at the local level in order to pay these very generous defined benefit pensions. And I think they've seen it firsthand. They've seen the reduction in police and fire, schools, libraries, and so they felt it firsthand. So I think the public is way ahead in terms of not only understanding the extent of the problem, but also being willing to step in and fix it with a ballot initiative.
So it's a case of the politicians saying, I must hurry and get to the front of the crowd for I am their leader?
I wish that were the case, but right now we have a governor who just, continues to increase pension options and payments for public employees, and is not addressing the retirement health care problem, which is another $70+ billion on the low end problem. Or at least doing incrementally. There's something more and dramatic needs to be done to address those costs going forward, because they're not taking care of themselves right now.
Are you optimistic that something will happen in the next 5 or 10 years? Or are you pessimistic?
I am. My kids are 7th generation Californians. 7th.
I thought you were from Colorado.
I'm from Colorado. My wife is not. She's a California girl.
Okay.
And in fact, they're 7th generation Sacramentans. They can go all the way back to the gold rush days here in Sacramento. We have a stake here. We want to make sure it's right and that it works. And I think when people realize that all these other services and opportunities are being crowded out because they've got to pay for obligations decades past, I think that the people will step up and say, hey, this is not fair. It's not right. It can't continue on. I'm hoping that happens this next year.
And that's important. It's not right. It's immoral. And it's immoral to kick the can down the road and make our kids and grandkids pay for this when we should step up today, fix this problem, solve it permanently. It can be done. So we're not obligating our kids to pay off this debt, which they didn't create. They didn't ask for it. And we shouldn't use our kids as piggy banks to fix this problem.
Free massages.
You got a couple more minutes. Any other parting thoughts on how to?
Well, I'm optimistic.
Okay.
I think in the next year or two there will be either one or a series of ballot measures that will be passed, because I think, again, the public is ahead of the legislature and the politicians on this because they've seen it, they've felt it, and I think they're making the connections now between having fewer local services and more money going to the pension fund.
That's the show. We'll quit on a note of optimism. Thank you very much for being part of the show. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place, on the Libertarian Counterpoint on YouTube and on Channel 17 Sacramento, WWW Access Sacramento Channel 17, and your favorite cable channel wherever you're viewing. Thank you very much for being part of the show. See you again next week.